Welcome to the Soar podcast, the place for creative entrepreneurs with limitless dreams and unconventional stories. I'm your host, Ray Hyde Cornell, founder and business mentor at Chiron Consulting and CEO and senior copywriter at Cornell Content Marketing. My goal is to bring you stories of what's possible so you can never tell yourself that your dreams are impossible. Right. Today we have Shelley Dennis, who is a longtime friend of mine and fellow writer. Shelley, tell our listeners all the amazing things that you do.
Thank you. Yeah. So presently I am a staff writer on The Connors at ABC, which is the Roseanne spinoff on its fourth season. And I met Ray doing copywriting, and we had done boot camps, and then later on kept in touch in sort of like I don't want to say support group, but support group. I've kind of reinvented myself a few times in the entertainment industry. I started in modeling long ago, ran around Europe for a while, came to LA, focused on acting. And then I fell in love with writing when I got into stand-up and sketch and improv and everything. And then the whole time I was waiting tables, I guess this is more of a story. I'll be more brief. I waited tables for 8.5 years while I was running around, and I was doing a lot of different gig work. And then I finally decided that writing was the focus, which is when I shifted into having like my own copywriting business, essentially. Yeah. So that helped me stop waiting tables. And I've been hustling to get a foot in the door to television comedy. Yeah. So here we are today.
And I think hustling is the perfect word for it, because as you said, you've done so many different things. You've done modeling, you've done acting, you've been in the entertainment industry, you've been in the marketing industry, you've done copywriting, you did content creation. I mean, you've done so many things, and that's really that like hustle vibe of, okay, what can I do? What skills can I leverage? Where can I find another paycheck to make this life that I want happen and get out of the things that we kind of feel like, okay, I'm only doing this right now to pay the bills, yes. Like the waiting tables. Yeah. Oh man. So how did you I want to say that modeling was like your first step into this like independent kind of like gig freelance lifestyle, right?
Yeah. That was the first time. That was my first real job, aside from, little side jobs in college and stuff. So I entered the workforce that way. Mm-hmm. And then pretty quickly, especially when I really decided to focus on acting and move to Los Angeles, I told my parents, I'm never going to have a 401k. I'm not going to have benefits. So I was trying to explain to them, because they so traditionally came from that place in, southeastern Oklahoma, where they, were like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, I'm figuring it out, but, I had to get my own insurance and a financial advisor where I could start saving for my retirement before, at an early age, because I couldn't depend on that from the jobs that I was working. And there's no guarantee. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this for 5 years, and when I hit that 5th year, I graduate, and then I get to do the thing that I want to do. It's like, maybe not.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And one of the things, anytime I think of you and I think of what you've done and how hard you worked to get to where you are, is I always think of, fuck, she's brave. Because you went to one of the most expensive cities in the US as a freelancer, as a gig worker. And you were like, this is where I know I need to be. This is where my career in entertainment needs me to be, and I'm going to do it. But what was that like for you? I mean, I anticipate it was terrifying.
It was terrifying. And you're saying it, in a way that I haven't thought about it before. And I'm like, yeah, that wasn't the best, it really wasn't the best strategy. I think I did a lot of the things that I did because I was so naive It's worth noting that I was born and raised in a town of like 700 people in southeastern Oklahoma, and we were 2.5 hours away from a mall. I mean, it's that kind of like, it's a very rural area. So I just knew I'd never been to LA before and certainly never been overseas. So I really would just like see things on TV and be like, oh, okay. So all of California is like Hollywood Boulevard. Got it. You know, I was very green. And I think had I been thinking more logically, there would have been a lot of reasons for me not to do it, but I would just, it was like 22. I was just like, let's go.
Well, and if you hadn't done that, if you hadn't had that like naive courage to just jump in and do the thing, do you think you would be where you are today?
No, no, I would not, because there's like a million other, I don't think that I would have always probably regretted it. But I would have logically, I would have convinced myself that these decisions were the right ones had I not gone and found something more stable, because that really is the logical thing to do. But you can't, like, there's an underlying like burning and desire to see, hey, would it have worked? Could I have done it? Yeah. Sink or swim.
Yeah. And it's that older part of our brains now looking back that's like, man, because I have the same thing. I'm like, how the fuck did I survive doing some of those things I did in my early 20s? Like, it makes no sense. But looking back, I'm like, man, that was so irrational. It was so impulsive. It was so reckless. I should have been more sensible. It's like, we always think we need to do the sensible thing. And yet when we follow our gut, when we chase those impulses, when we're just like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I know this is the right thing and I'm going to do it, it actually lands us exactly where we need to be.
Yeah. That's what's really cool about being in a creative industry is once I was able to get there and find my footing, there's been so much growth because as and consciously I'm not going, oh, I'm here to like grow as a human being. I'm like, right. Maybe, but most of it's like, I'm here to work on my craft and I'm here to, do better at on-camera auditioning and improv and all this stuff. But especially when I started getting into the stand-up aspect of it, I had to really look at myself in ways that I hadn't before and ask myself like how I really felt about things, to create authentic material. Yeah. So I grew so much after I sort of found that creative space where I could play in ways that I just don't think that I would have been able to grow no matter how many self-help workshops I took, Yeah.
Yeah. So say a little bit about that, because I feel like although you've done so many different things, modeling, acting, copywriting, and now working in TV as a TV writer, they might seem disjointed, but in my head, it seems like a natural progression of you needing to develop that connection with the human experience and your emotion and being able to put yourself mentally into situations so that you could actually write about them authentically and make the copy come to life and the script come to life.
Right. Yeah. So I do remember when I left Oklahoma and went to Milan, I just bought a one-way ticket. I'd had an invitation from an agency, but I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know I'd never done that kind of modeling before, but I do remember thinking, I need life experience. That was the one time that I consciously said, whatever happens over there, it's going to make a good story. Yeah. So I wanted to, experience Europe. I'd never left the surrounding states of Oklahoma. So it was all so new. And I was like, game on, but then when I got to LA, it was more about just survival. I was so, again, because I had come from, like many of us, a more traditional household where my mom was a teacher, my dad was in the system. I was like, and they would say, they were very supportive, but they said, we can't help you. at this stage and with this
Yeah.
stuff, we don't know. So you're on your own. And that was terrifying because they'd always been almost like helicopter parents growing
Yeah.
up. So I was really just trying to survive and finding it felt, in hindsight, it does sort of look like it's going in one direction, but I felt so scattered. I would just take whatever I thought I could get that would make me money and keep me afloat. But when I did the Disney ABC program, well, this year I'm out of it now because I got staffed, but during the program, one of the most interesting things that people found about my life and were like, right about this, was those experiences that I thought were just a means to an end to get somewhere. And they actually give me things to write about and give me a perspective that I wouldn't have had.
Yeah.
So it's just a very different way of thinking about our experiences when it's like, oh no, this is because, I think we might get to a place sometimes in our life where it's like, man, had I just known I wanted to do this, I wouldn't have done X, Y, Z. I would have become an assistant at 22. I would have worked my way up through the system, but then I wouldn't have had anything to write about.
Yeah.
So I had to accept the fact that all those things, and some were great experiences, some were awful, but they make up who you are,
Yeah. Yeah. And you are one of my absolute favorite copywriters. I mean, when I read your bio for the podcast, I was literally busting up laughing. I mean, you have this like subtle wit and humor to everything that you write, which I just absolutely adore. And so if you could give some advice to someone wanting to improve as a copywriter or as a comedy writer, what would you say?
Thank you. What's the first thing that came to mind when you said that I think is sound advice is, so the bio was mine to write. That was for me.
Yeah.
I have gotten bad feedback from clients who weren't asking for that kind of writing. So it's like what I did best was often not what the client needed. And I had to learn that through trial and error. So sometimes I would see a story in a bio, and bio is an example. It can be a homepage, it can be whatever kind of copywriting you're doing. It's getting the client's voice. But sometimes your version is better, but it's not what they're asking for. And you're there to serve the client. Sometimes bios were the hardest for me because I would see the story and that's like, what I want to write. So I would get all creative and I would like present them in a certain light, which I thought was, very flattering and interesting. And there were times where the client didn't see themselves in that way.
Yeah.
And it's very personal. So I think it's just being really aware of who you're serving and not being self-indulgent in the fun stuff. So I think it's important to know that, and then also have your own writing that you can do if that is something that feeds you. Because right now I'm on a show and I might have a funny pitch or something, but if it doesn't serve the showrunner's vision, who would be the copywriting client, then it's just self-indulgent.
Right.
Which is why I have my own creative projects that I work on when I have spare time, so I can feel like my personal voice is being heard. So just, I would say, don't get lost in serving everyone's voice and never getting to express your own.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest piece of advice I would give.
Yeah. It's such a balancing act because, I mean, to your point, we all as writers kind of have a particular style or vibe or energy that we like to do. And oftentimes our clients do come to us for that. But then if we inject too much of ourselves into the copy and the client can't see themselves, or they can't see what they wanted, especially with things like bios and about pages. Oh my God, people want to put the most boring things on there, like their degrees and their certifications. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And they don't tell the story of how they got there. And so it's this balance between being able to write what you know is going to be effective for your client because you are a third party creative, and advise them that, hey, look, you're 19 degrees, that's great, but it's really boring. Please tell this story about when you were 8 and you had your epiphany moment in life,
Right.
that sort of thing. And then you have to have that, kind of tug of war with the client as delicately as possible to keep them happy and paying. And so what do you do when you have that frustration where you're like, but there's all this creative stuff I want to do. So I love that you have both of those things. You write professionally and you write personally to have that creative outlet.
It's important. And the thing that copywriting taught me in my current career is emotional intelligence and understanding. It's so that honestly, like every when people ask me about what it's like being on the show and, how do I feel in the room? I'm like, it is a crash course on emotional social intelligence of just understanding how to, it's never about you,
Right.
you're always serving who you're writing for. And if you can write the best work of your life, but if it's not what they're asking for,
Right.
then it gets trashed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about your current role because holy shit, you write for an on-air television program. So tell me about that.
It is my dream job. And for so long, I moved out to LA from Europe 13 years ago. And I didn't know anyone. There was one gal that I sat next to in a class at University of Oklahoma where I went, who was like, "Oh, we'll have coffee when you come out," And I'm like, "Great, I have one friend." I didn't know, I knew nothing. And for the last 13 years, I've just gotten what I could get. And this job that I have now is the first time that I got what I really wanted, which is wild. And it was bizarre to have the experience of getting, because a brief history to where this makes sense. I got accepted into the Disney ABC writing program, and the goal of that program is to staff you on one of their shows under the umbrella. So that includes Hulu, FX, National Geographic, if they have some, like everything. And that included the Connors. And I pitched to get into the program in finals week. You pitch an episode of like any TV show that you want under that umbrella that's still on the air. And I did the Connors, and I grew up watching Roseanne. I grew up watching Roseanne, and not just like, oh, I've seen a few episodes. Like that was our show, and the family would watch it. And I come from a very like humble background. We grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere. And I saw like a real family on TV, and so it had an impact on me. So fast forward to being an adult where I'm interviewing for the show, I'm just like I'm losing it. And I don't even think they were looking for a lower level writer for a long time. So, because I kept like trying to figure out if anyone was staffing on the show, but I I used my copywriting hustle skills where you like email people and we did, for context, Ray and I did a boot camp where we were constantly pitching ourselves through email to try to get more clients. So I started emailing people that might have some degree of separation to the people who do hire on the show. And said, here's why I'm perfect for this show. I need a meeting. So I did that a couple of times, ended up getting the meeting. And then what was really interesting is that for the first couple of minutes, it was three guys that I interviewed with, or the head of the show. And they asked me, oh, so you wrote on this show last year and you were in the program, blah, 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 resume. And then one of them just kind of stopped this kind of professional flow of conversation. And he said, "What did your dad do?" And I was like, "Oh, he drove an oil truck for a long time and then sold that and then did X, Y, and Z." And he said, "So he's blue collar." And I was like, oh, they don't give a shit
No.
about my my resume now. They just want to see like what my life experience was.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. And they were like, okay. And then I could see them kind of like wheels turning. And I go, I know the taste of commodity cheese. And they were all like, I could see a little like, okay. And then, we talked a little bit longer. And then I got a call a couple hours later that they hired me. And it was, I joke about it. And it's like the first time that being broke growing up worked in my favor, but it's
Yeah.
all about story. Everyone wants to know what your story is, what you can bring to the big story that everyone's telling. So I'm learning a lot, and I'm with I'm in a room with comedy legends. It's not lost on me. I'm not jaded yet with the experience of like, I get to go to work today. It's a cool feeling to have, especially after, just, I don't want to say grinding. That's such a negative word, but that's what it felt like. It was grinding.
Yeah. Yeah. It was that hustle.
Yeah.
And you know me, I will always be pro freelancer, pro independent contractor, be your own boss, like forge your own path. But that's not always the right path for everybody for their entire life. I mean, perfect example, my husband, he really enjoys having a W-2 job. He likes the routine, he likes the expectation, he likes the benefits, he provides the healthcare for both of us. And I mean, that's crazy valuable. So W-2 positions are right for some people. And what I love about your story is that you had those 13 years of hustling and gig work and the independence and the freelancing. And now you have a 401k, you have a W-2, like you have a job. How did you know, especially after so long of being in the hustle, how did you know that going to that kind of work was right for you?
I wanted, well, it wasn't even a conscious choice. It was just working toward the goal, which is to write in television. But, I am an employee for 20 weeks, maybe, and then I have to go looking for a job again. I could be brought back. The show could get canceled. Probably won't, knock on wood. Or they might not need my services next year for whatever reason. So and I'm still conscious of that and making sure to update people, networking with emails and having general meetings, because that's one thing that freelance work taught me, is that you're always thinking about the next gig. So never am I going to, it doesn't matter how far up the ladder I get. I'm never going to be like, oh, well, it's time to relax now. You always have to be thinking of that other job. So you will always have the freelance spirit, even if you're a W-2, because you still have to hit your hours to get your benefits and things like that. So, it wasn't when there's another way, there's a freedom. So it's like, okay, even if I can always go back to copywriting, I can always go back and write blogs. I can always find a way to make money on my services because I've done it. I think what gets really scary is when you enter W-2 work from the start and you haven't had the experience of, I'm my own boss. I'm, in control of this, and I choose who I want to work with. Then it is scary, because if you get let go, you don't know how to be a freelancer.
Yeah.
So it's huge.
Yeah. So your skills are really your safety net.
Yeah. And that's also why we're supposed to continuously be learning, should want to learn, but always taking, classes, workshops, reading, finding things that inspire us, to get us to the next level.
I love that you said that TV writing was always the goal. That was always the end goal. The hustling and the freelancing, that was the means to getting to where you are today. So I think that's just such a huge testament to following your gut. And if there's something that you want deep down, even if you know it's going to be a long, crazy ass journey to get there, just keep following that and doing what you need to do to get there, because you're going to pick up all those skills along the way.
Absolutely. So two things that made me think of is when I was waiting tables, I worked with, we were all in the entertainment industry, all of us like servers. And I worked with a couple of comedians. There's one gal that I work with named Katie, and we were just kind of like resting between our, like we're on our shift. We're just kind of leaned up against the computers that were behind us. And I typed something in the computer, and she goes, 10,000 hours, Shell, 10,000 hours. And she was referring to the Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers, that talks about it takes 10,000 hours to, become a professional, or like an expert, whatever word he used. And she was just joking.
Yeah.
But after a minute, I started thinking about it, and my brain almost exploded because I started paying attention. I was like, I wonder how many hours I've accumulated. And then it was almost like I started watching myself from another place, and I was like, okay, that guy needs jam. I got to clean up these plates over here on this table. This guy needs more coffee. And because I was so aware of like 5 things at once. And then I realized that even on the keyboard or the little computer screen where you put in the orders, I didn't even really have to look at the screen very much. I knew where the buttons are.
Yeah.
I'd become an expert at waiting tables.
Yeah.
And it was very soon after that I said, I want those hours, even if they're not doing TV writing, to go toward writing, or I'm never going to get there. So that's when I started doing copywriting, or like moving in that direction, because I was like, I've got a tenure in waiting tables now. That's not what I want. That wasn't the plan.
Yeah. So your friend and coworker just saying that, just 10,000 hours, that sparked the pivot away from waiting tables and into the work that got you to where you are today.
It's important that we don't get stuck in those jobs that are only meant to be temporary. And I worked at the same restaurant for 8.5 years. People would walk in after a couple of years and be like, oh my God, you're still here? Yeah. I was Shelly, worked at Toast, that I was a waitress, and it became an identity. And my soul just started to smell like ketchup, I was like, I was like, and I started to think of myself and, identify in that way. And I was like, I have to get out of this. Yeah.
So what advice would you give the people who are listening right now, if they do feel like, maybe they've been working at Starbucks to supplement their income so that they can be a designer on the side, or they've been doing the whole Upwork, Fiverr sort of hustle, just trying to get anything they can. What would you advise them? What advice would you give them to help them get to where they really want to be and out of that rut?
Constant, I think it's really important that we constantly check in with ourselves. Do not be on autopilot. Don't do that. Every, month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever makes sense to you, because all of those things are great. They build there. We learn so much from those jobs that we couldn't possibly see, like when we're in it. And it's important to just not get comfortable. So I would constantly be asking myself, what my game plan is, what are you doing to get out of it? I did set a date for myself of when I wanted to be out of waiting tables, and I missed it, and it was soul crushing. it was just a really a dark time when I had to go into work the day that I said I was going to be done with it. But
Yeah.
I probably left a few months after that.
Mm.
So I still had that goal there. So it's like, hold yourself accountable, and like, without sounding too pretentious by quoting Einstein right now, I always, like, the quote that I would always like go back to was that, what is it? Doing the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yeah.
Just make sure that you're constantly looking for opportunities, because we can be blind to them if we're just in our, like, you know, kind of zombie state of going to our 9 to 5. So it was just awareness is that's the long version to say awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those sort of comfortable plateaus can be great if you've been hustling and grinding and working up to a certain point, and then you need a rest to enjoy the work you've done to get to this point, to celebrate achieving that goal. But you don't want to stay there for too long.
Right.
You have to constantly be pushing to that next level, all while recognizing everything that you've done to get to where you are. But if you start feeling that comfort is turning into a rut, that's kind of okay, it's time to jump ship. It's time to do something that terrifies you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very important to have people in your life that are doing what you're doing, or at least have that same mindset of, I'm either where I want to be or I'm getting to where I want to be. I think that's what was so, and I'll turn it to you. Like, it was what was so valuable about our relationship, Ray, is that we would meet, and you were always like the bar. I mean, really, you like, I might have found a client and you have been like, I just landed this huge account. And I remember there are things that you said in just conversation that I've never forgotten.
Mm.
And it was like, one in particular, what you were talking about, how you wanted nice things and you wanted money, and you're such a genuine person. There's nothing superficial about you. And hearing someone like you say, yeah, I want nice things. I remember you saying, I want a really high thread count sheets. And, you know, and I was like, wow. And that sort of expanded my mindset, because I wasn't thinking about like, oh, I want nice things. And having people like that to inspire you to go after more is as valuable as anything. So it's just important to like also be aware of like who you're keeping company with.
Yeah. And the one caveat I'll add to that is just make sure that other people's goals don't become your goals. Make sure that your goals are actually your goals.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true.
Because just because I want very high thread count sheets, because that to me is like the definition of luxury, just rolling around in my super soft sheets on Sunday morning. That's my like, oh, I've made it kind of feeling. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the same thing for you. And maybe other people aren't motivated by money. Maybe other people are motivated more by time with their kids, or being able to travel the world, or whatever it is. And for you, it was, I mean, there were many things, but one of them was being a writer in Hollywood. And you never lost sight of that goal, even though you did all of the gig work and you were in all of these different areas of entertainment and marketing and service. You never lost sight of your goal, and you made it.
Yay. Well said. Well said.
So on that note, where can people check you out in all the crazy cool places?
I'm lucky that my name hasn't been taken by another. And if you Google search, I also have like a ShelleyDennis.com, and it's spelled SHELLEY. Many people forget the E.
Yep.
But I'm on all the social places, Facebook and IMDb page and things like that. So you can find me that way.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Shelley.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. Hey, it's Ray again. Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, YouTube, and more. And want to be a guest on the show or know someone who has an amazing story of entrepreneurship? Apply on our website at www.chironconsulting.us/podcast.